Call the meeting to order. This is the Fort Myers Beach Management and Planning Session for Wednesday, December 8th, 2021. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. All members are here, and attorney, manager, and clerk. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The first item to look at is the bus shelter installation and advertising discussion. To start this off.
Mr. Mayor, I will, if that's okay.
Fine.
So we have been sort of at a stalemate for the most part with Lee County over the installation of bus shelters. And the primary cause of that has been the past, the town has indicated its reluctance to have advertising on the bus shelter signs. And the county's position is that's what helps fund the cost of the structure and its maintenance of the structure. The town would be responsible for picking up the trash and air it clean. But so anyway, we've been stuck in a sort of holding pattern for a long time, which is why as the project was built, benches were there, or bus shelters were there, were removed, and none were replaced. Other than the new one we worked to put together at the library, which is the junction point for the trolley and the tram. So we thought, and I think some of you thought, it would be a good idea to reopen this discussion and revisit the policy and see if council wants to continue its prior position of a ban, perhaps a tiered position of not this but that, or just say, look, people being bombarded with advertising on their phones and everything else, what's another 12 ads in history, part of the total. So that introduction, we provided with you the proposed locations, if we decide to go forward with the shelter program, and a reminder of what the shelters look like. Of course, nothing would prevent us from buying and installing the shelters ourselves with no advertisement if that was the council's position. We don't have a budget for that, but we could.
Oh, what's the cost of these if we do it without advertising?
I don't know. I want to say that they were like 10 grandish.
18, really? And is that with or without the emergency button that the public?
That's a totally separate thing, because that's really a cell. You're providing basically a cell type service. So that's just add on whether you want that or not.
Okay. And would the advertising be on both sides? Because I noticed one picture, it had like a route map on one side of the sign.
Well, they, rather than have the thing blank, they'll usually have two route maps, and then if they advertise one side, they'll have one route map, and if they get advertising sold on the other side, they probably have no route maps. That's probably what they do.
It probably means on Fort Myers Beach, then it would be two advertising, no route map, I'm guessing.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what the demand would be. Being an island, is it people on the island advertising to go to their place on the island already? You're here already. For the most part, there's pretty good saturation of advertising versus advertising off island, which I think may have been an initial concern, as well as perhaps, maybe some concerns about what type of advertising.
I noticed when you're coming, just before you hit the bridge from the north side, there's like 3 benches there with advertising on them, and I don't believe that's a stop of any sort. There's some demand.
Well, I think that in terms of people in a small area, you have a lot of people in a small area, so I think it would be one of the more attractive places to place your ad if you business and inclined to do so. I don't know, how their advertising program works, where you could say, I want to put my ad at that sign, or you say that, want to put up 3 ads and they say, okay, well, we guarantee a location, but, we'll try to hit your target population.
You say someone from Lee-Tran was here, Roger?
Yes, we have someone here from Lee-Tran.
Could they just clarify that question that Councilor Veach asked on the advertising? In other words, does it work? In other words, will it be on both sides if the demand is there, or do the route signs stay on one side?
Really, we could work those concepts out. So, I mean, typically we do have them on both sides, but if it's something, a schedule on one side, probably on the outside. And
Thanks for being here. You're going to have to identify yourself.
I'm sorry,
That's
I'm
okay.
Dawn Huff with Lee Tran.
Fine. Nice
Sorry.
to have you here.
And just to simplify this, if we agree to the advertising, to allow the advertising, there would be no cost for these facilities for our island aside from the maintenance of them. And
Right, once the shelters are put in and installed, the maintenance of those would be,
I guess what Roger was saying, cleaning up
But
around.
we
Yeah.
empty the trash and clean up the immediate area daily.
But that's just to be clear for those who are watching. If we agree to advertising, there would be no cost to install these facilities. Is that correct?
well, the grant we're applying for with, Chelsea's going to submit and she'll talk a little bit more about that, but that will pay for the shelters.
And the grant's contingent upon the advertising?
So,
I'm sorry, I guess I'm missing something, Roger. I thought the advertising was, our denial of the advertising was hindering our ability to get these.
Well, there's a way to fund them through a potential grant. We don't know if we'll get the grant. We know that there's a grant available. We think we could be successful if we collaborate with Lee County. I wouldn't necessarily, unless you want to punt, say, well, you can go for the grant, see if you can get them for nothing, and then we'll worry about the advertising later, or we can make a decision today. But Chelsea, I don't know if you want to add about that.
O'Reilly, Public Works Director. So part of this grant is the MPO would like to know who's maintaining those shelters. Existing agreement that we have with Lee-Tran is that they maintain the actual benches, the structures that are out there, and then the town collects the waste. And so we have to have something in writing because as part of the grant application, they need to know who will maintain them in perpetuity.
So Chelsea, in order to get that maintenance agreement with the county, we have to agree to the advertising?
They would, it
That would
sounds to
help.
me,
There's a cost of maintenance to these shelters, and that would help offset
Yes.
their maintenance cost.
But I'm saying, is the county saying that their cooperation with the grant is contingent upon us allowing the advertising?
Can't put words into their mouth, but that would
Well,
help.
I can tell you what their previous position is. Their previous position is the advertising pays for the maintenance, ongoing maintenance of the shelters, offsets that, and that's why they have in the past requested not to allow advertising.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to clarify.
it's an additional revenue center for the county. That's what it is. And
These shelters were not part of their overall plan, so this is new to them as well.
Okay, very helpful. I'm just trying to clarify.
let's just assume, Dawn, let's assume that we decided that we would allow the advertising. Who actually solicits the advertising? Lee-Tran? Is that who,
we have a very professional marketing department, and when she came in, actually, her and I started with Lee Tran in 2019 together. I don't work with her as far as marketing, but she came from a very extensive background of marketing, very good, and she's very particular about who can and who can't. Of course, we have our guidelines, nothing inappropriate, but she's very good at doing what she.
that's where I was heading with this, was
Yes.
the appropriateness or inappropriateness of the
Definitely.
advertising. We just had a discussion the other day about certain store off island, and that's the exact type that we wouldn't want advertising on the island.
Right.
So I think if we decided to collectively to go with advertising on these things, that I think we'd have to have somewhat of a little say in
Sure.
in who's going to. I mean, I respect that your people, you and your folks know what you're doing, of course, but.
Of course, but it's your
but,
island.
We'd also like to make sure nothing slips in,
Yes.
you know. Anyhow, that being said, I'll open it up. Dan, go ahead.
Question, Don. Town manager previously had a pretty good suggestion as far as the advertising, maybe allowing first dibs to island businesses to take advantage of that space for, is that something that the county?
I think they
That
would
would be-
definitely entertain that, yes. Makes sense.
Are your rates, your advertising rates uniform no matter where the bus shelter is?
I'd have to ask our marketing department, but I think they are, but I could ask that question.
Would an advertiser have going back to Roger's question earlier, would the advertiser have an option as to which shelter they can choose, or is it first come, first serve, and you place it where you want?
It's, from what I understand, it's typically first come, first serve. But again, I'd have to ask our marketing department that question. From what I understand, from what I've heard conversations in the past, it is.
They could potentially, they're the first ones in line, they could ask for a specific bus shelter to have their advertisement on?
Yes.
Okay, thank
I interrupted the vice mayor before. Did you have a question?
No, it was answered.
Okay, I have just a question, Dawn, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, just asking. Chelsea provided us a nice picture of morning, and one of the sides of the sign has a beach trolley and tram schedules and routes. Have you seen that picture?
Yes.
An excellent display, and we have a lot of people, we're trying to encourage people to take mass transit on our island, and that's a great source of information. If we agreed to do advertising on one side and you maintain the route schedules on the other side, would the counties walk away happy today and content?
I think we would. I don't think that's a concern, especially, as I mentioned earlier, if advertisement was on the inside, you know, with traffic coming, northbound, and it was facing vehicles, that makes the most sense for advertising, because on the backside, cars go by, not the foot traffic wouldn't see, but yeah, I don't think that would be an issue.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be willing to support a proposal that allows advertising on one side as long as we maintain the trolley schedules and routes on the other side.
I would agree too.
Yeah, so would I. That
I would as well.
sounds like,
So, Mr. Mayor, just to be clear, do we also want to include that, to the extent possible, that Fort Myers Beach businesses would get first preference for these?
A good idea.
I would prefer that.
that doesn't sound like the county would have a problem with that, so that sounds good.
You could just clarify what you mean by first preference.
Well, just that perhaps as you go out and indicate that these are available, maybe your initial marketing effort is limited to Fort Myers Beach businesses for, say, 30 days, to give them a chance to do that.
Oh,
And then-
yes. Mhm.
Then if they're not all utilized by Fort Myers, then you would extend it beyond that.
Yes, yes.
If the price is the same to the town or the county, what difference would it make?
I guess the thing I would like to add is I'd like there to be some consideration of the size of the actual shelter part pertaining to the stops. Some of the stops have lots of people that gather there. The one that was put up, shelter part only covers basically 2 people. And I've seen a dozen people standing out there in the sun. And I know we do have some statistics that some of the shelters do. I'd love to see, especially this one here by the library, be enlarged so that there is more shade area for, our children and seniors standing in the sun and the rain.
Well, I think at this particular location by the library,
Yes,
with the advertising and the grant, we could look at seeing if we can obtain 2 more units to obtain more coverage there.
and the others down the island, I know there are some of
Yeah,
them.
so I wanted to talk
Others,
about
I'd hate to
those
see them all
next.
just have 2.
Yeah, I want to talk about those next. Just so you know, along Estero in particular, we're very much site constrained. We're going to have to talk to property owners and others to gain area.
I get that, but right here, we have 2 benches sitting out in the sun, which made no sense.
Here, it's not a problem, I don't believe. I just wanted to be careful because you were saying that other popular areas will do the best we can considering
Understood.
site constraints. But here shouldn't be a problem.
I'm not mistaken, that shelter faces, I know we consider Estero Island and reference it as north and south, but what faces east and west? I think that one faces east for the most part. So most of these shelters, I know the curvature of the island will face, north and south, face south or north, depending on what side of the road. That helps a little bit with this particular shelter as far as, that helps a little bit with the shade, but I see your point.
Well, and I assume that like where we're going to put one, there's going to be one on the other side of the street.
The most part, yes, but a lot of it is based on the space available after the improvements were done on Estero Boulevard, because if there's not enough right-of-way or easement, they weren't able to put, enough space there. But each sidewalk for those particular stops that we picked are at least 9 feet, and that's what we need for, and this is something that Lee County DOT, because I did work with them since that was their road project, but no 36 inches required for the sidewalk. We adjusted it and felt that we wanted to leave at least 48 inches for your foot and bike and ped traffic, because you might only leave 36 inches. A lot of traffic down there sometimes. So we took that into consideration when picking stops, plus ridership. Because ridership most of the time, as far as what's beneficial for a shelter, is your boardings. Lightings, people get off and they go. So if a stop across the road is mostly for what they call a lighting, exiting the bus, and people typically don't use a shelter. But if a significant ridership for boardings, then obviously they're utilizing that shelter off the island or get to another part of the island.
One last clarifying question, Dawn. Will the shelters that we're looking at, the ones we're talking about, will they all have these individual seat dividers, which discourages folks from laying or sleeping on those benches?
Yes.
Thank you.
Partially the reason we selected that style, and we do want to keep consistent with our inventory because these are fairly new. We have them at about 8 different locations, including.
I think that's
On
really
Fifth
helpful.
Street.
It obviously would discourage folks from sleeping or laying on there. Very good.
Well, thanks so much for,
One more point.
you got one other question, Paul?
Yeah, so when our Public Safety Committee recommended we install like an emergency button, emergency call button on those, is that something you've done in other shelters? And if we want to do that, we county?
Directed at me?
Yes.
Okay, I know you were talking to Mr. I don't think we have them at other shelters or at other bus stops. I don't know if that's something, but I could find that information.
If it could be covered by that grant, I don't know if that's possible.
I just wanted to follow up with kind of next steps if this is how you want to proceed. John Gogoy from the MPO just stepped in. He has helped us with the grant application. This would be a LAP project. As you know, the signal at Old San Carlos and Times Square was a LAP project. Times Square will be a LAP project. So this is federal funding that would come down with the availability of that funding potentially as early as July of 2022. So we are kind of on a time constraint with the application, but next steps would be formalizing an interlocal between the town and Lee Tran for the maintenance and of these stops, and the formal application through the MPO. So we would keep you apprised of that application process. And then Ron wanted to add any on here.
You came down, come on, Ron, stand up and say hello.
By the way, while Ron's coming up. Good morning, guys. I just want to say, Ron has been a really strong advocate for the town, working with us and the MPO and the lab projects, and wouldn't have gotten our initial projects or where we've gotten to with respect to the signal in Times Square without him.
You, Ron?
Morning.
Morning. We were I was coordinating with CELSI regarding projects from the town of Fort Myers Beach for our next funding cycle. We start in 2022 for the MPO priorities. And then I saw that bus shelter project, and MPO staff was actually debating on pot of funds for the current fiscal year that you have to spend pretty quickly. And there are some caveats attached to that as to the eligibility of projects and all that. And we thought your project, the shelter project, would be a fine fit because it's just a procurement of bus shelters. It's not typical infrastructure improvement project which requires design or construction. So having said that, I've already coordinated with APDOT because APDOT is almost like a banker for us for federal dollars that comes to the MPO. So this is basically, actually it's COVID-related infrastructure funds, one-time funds. If you recall, back in December, late December, Congress passed an act, and based upon which, we're receiving this, ZFSU, general funds, and that's what we are going to be using for this particular project. Also, as part of this process, we're going to make an amendment to one of our documents. Think of this like your CIP. So we have an adopted CIP, and ours is called a TIP, Transportation Improvement Program. So we have to amend that, include your project, to add your project. So we plan to bring it before the MPO board in February. So I would request Mayor Murphy to show up at the meeting.
I
and
will
show
be there, Ron.
support.
I'll be at that one.
That's all I have.
All right.
If I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, thank you for being here this morning, Ron, and thanks for all your kind assistance to the town. Just for the folks who may be watching, would you just give a brief overview of, we used a lot of acronyms this morning for the public who's watching. Talk a little bit about what the MPO is, and then talk a little bit about what LAP funds, what's that stand for, what's that mean, just to kind of give people a little thumbnail sketch of what we're talking about this morning.
So MPO is the Metropolitan Planning Organization. So urbanized area essentially has a metropolitan planning organization. Ours is called the Lee MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, because it's based out of Lee County. But we are not affiliated to the county. We're an independent entity, and it has been formed based on federal statutes.
Then LAP
The
funds?
LAP.
Yep.
Local agency program. So basically what happens is, the Lee MPO is like a conduit to the local governments in an urbanized area to receive and disperse federal dollars that comes to this area. So of late, also we have this MPO priority process by which we identify projects from the local governments and then we try to fund them. And APDOT develop its work program. Again, the work program is a 5-year work program. So what APDOT is now saying, in the past, the rules were different, and it's rules that were made by APDOT. And they are saying that for a local government to take money and get it paired to a particular project, then the local government would be responsible for managing the project. If it is a construction related, or in your case, the bus shelter program, it's a question of procuring the equipment and installing it. It has to go through lab process, meaning, the locals have to be lab certified, local agency program certified, receive the dollars, and then if they're lab certified, then they will be allowed to manage the project. In the past, APDOT would manage the project on their own. But because their staff is becoming smaller, like cuts and all that, turnovers and all that, so they can put their attention to only a few projects around District 1. But that's why they want the locals, if they're requesting for funds, that they be also responsible for managing the project. And you can only manage the project if you are certified by the state.
That's very helpful, thank you.
No, just a question, who would the entity be that would be managing this project? Would it be DDOT, the county, or the town? Are we like acquiring these and installing them?
Yes, we would be responsible for putting out the RFP or ITB, of course, coordinating that with Lee Tran and making sure it's meeting all of their specifications. The town would be the one to out the money and then plus the reimbursement and managing the project.
And from what I understand what you said, it sounds like that there is a fund for shovel-ready projects
Yes.
that we can immediately do, and we could be one of those and accelerate the funding.
Ron has made that a possibility for us, yes.
So just to follow up on Councilor Adderhall's question. As state FDOT departments have shrunk over the last 10 years, had to have a process where eligible local governments understood the federal and state process, permit and other associated regulations, utilize this federal money, and not be in a position where a procedural mistake was made and the money had to be returned. They developed this lap certification project, which basically put the government through the same training as if we work for FDOT in terms of how the federal programs work, so that we could administer the programs locally, fully cognizant of all the applicable rules and regulations. So that's what's developed over the last 10 years. And the last reason for it is, as a general rule, when you go from the state to the county to the municipalities are a lot more nimble in terms of being able to implement projects.
Very good, thank you.
Okay,
Just to clarify, I would recommend that we go forward with this and then try to include funding for the emergency call and for additional benches at the higher use stops.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. So let's mix them together. One is, are we going to allow advertising? Because the pressure point right now that we have is not Ron and his process or anything else. It's purely, we have to have an interlocal agreement for maintenance. And so we either have to decide today, we're going to be maintaining the shelter, so if a light breaks in it, we're going to fix it, or we're going to allow FDOT, Lee Tran to advertise on one side, as was discussed, and then they would become responsible for maintenance. And so we have to craft that agreement with them and get that before you at probably the first meeting in January. That's that. Then, in terms of what's grant eligible and the other bells and whistles you may want as part of the shelters, we'll do the best we can do without putting the grant in jeopardy. Problem with the light 911 system, whatever you want to call it, is that those require ongoing costs. These projects pretty much set up, you build them, you complete them, they're done with the LAP funding. So that's why that might be a little tricky.
John, thanks for coming down, and thank you for your advocacy for the, give my best to all the folks up at the MPO. Thank you.
Don has one more point.
Hi, Don.
I did want to point out, I'm not sure the power that's needed for those buttons, but our shelters are, the shelters that we're recommending are solar powered. So there's no electricity needed for them. So I don't know if that would make a difference or not. They're solar powered. There's lighting.
Dawn, thanks for coming down. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
all your information, and we look forward to working with you
Definitely
throughout this
be-
project. And
Or we're not backwards, right?
thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Chelsea. All right, we'll move on. The next next item is the TDC projects for grant cycle fiscal year 22-23.
Mr. Mayor, the reason this is on today's M&P agenda is so that you're aware of what the staff has put together as potential projects, and so that if there are any other ideas or suggestions, or reprioritization or anything of that nature, you could provide this with us now so that work on it over the next 30 days and have a final project list for you in January.
Okay.
So, obviously, if you have any comments on our projects, the staff has accumulated, that's fine, but, more importantly, if there's a project out there that you would like us to look into or investigate as a possible EDC project, this would be a good time to express any of those ideas. And I think, for example, years ago, the vice mayor brought up the restroom facility, so as an example. So,
The swings that were suggested for Newton Park, could that be actually on this list?
well, I don't believe it could be, but, we could ask, but again, one of the things you want to be careful about is, sort of not appearing to be a glutton by asking for too many things.
Playground equipment. is
Playground
right.
equipment is on the list of
The BS list
exclusions.
there, yeah.
And making sure that you know, the right prioritization in that context. I mean, relatively speaking, that's going to be in the scope of things when we look at the sand renourishment, the beach renourishment, our $1 million beach maintenance patrol tab, some of the other things we do, it's going to be a relatively smaller ticket item anyway, even if we're eligible.
Just for folks who are concerned about the beach renourishment project, obviously it's referenced here, Roger. It sounds like that'll be sort of an initial installment in a much more significant ask the following year. Is that
It's a multiple year project. We have the beach broken into phases. So idea is we would complete phase 1 on Friday and start phase 2 on Monday. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we're trying to utilize, to a very large extent, state fund and TDC funding, and they have other demands on them. So that's one of the reasons we broken into phases, and also there's a practicality aspect of it. We can't shut down the whole beach, to do the project. So that's why it's broken down in phases. And at your January M&P, it's our intention to bring back coastal engineering and give you all an update on the beach project, or you give us the official go-ahead to apply to TDC funding. That'll all be part of your January discussions.
Thank you.
Do you have anything else you want to add to that? We'll move on. Next item is Fort Myers Beach camera project.
Mr. Mayor, we have presentations from 2 of the Lee County Sheriff's Office's vendors,
Yes.
Block and Green Wire, and after hearing that, those presentations, you asked us to go ahead and sort of try to get a more specific quantitative proposal. We were able to receive something from Flock in time for today's meeting. We have not received anything from Green Wire yet. So, question I have for you is, one is, do you want to wait for both to proceed? Or you're comfortable starting with Flock? And 2 is, Flock's proposal suggests sort of groups of 2 cameras, so you can have as many locations as you like. Clearly, from staff's perspective, we recommend going for both bridges as a minimum. If you want an intermediate island one or another location, we can consider those and get that going. Because those 2 systems, while they both lead to Lee County Sheriff's Office, they're independent. Hire one for the other.
I must say, I was more impressed with the Flock presentation, but fairness to Wire and the citizens, really, we should probably wait for the other proposal. It's my opinion.
I agree, because but more, I think that they work together. So that, like the green wire is probably better for pedestrian areas, a lot of pedestrian activity, and the flock is probably, you know, good for seeing who's coming on and off the island.
Sort of a hybrid.
Have you any idea when we're gonna get green wires?
They, to my knowledge, they have not responded with a, we'll get it to you by this date.
So we could,
And
Could
just
go-
to be, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't mean to interrupt.
That's all right.
Just to be clear, the green wire one is more difficult because it's not standalone. So when we get them in, let's just say, for argument's sake, they wanted to put it on the alleyway, the beach access by Hooters. You have to work with Hooters or one of those adjacent property owners to power and cellular or internet access or whatever to make that work, whereas the flock ones are standalone. They don't require that. They're just mounted either on an existing pole or a new pole, and they're up and running.
and we could go ahead with the flock and then,
Personally, that
Come
would be
back.
personally, that would be my recommendation.
well, good.
You know, if there's consensus on the locations, because I think, you know, with season coming, whatever, to the extent that there is an incident or an issue, the fact that may help Lee County Sheriff's Office, address an issue. Why would we want to wait to have them? I don't think it's a financial concern. Do both. We've already discussed that. So it's just really a matter of who's ready to go first and second. Now, if there's a location that you're undecided about, whether it should be a flock location or a green wire location, we could set that aside to the obvious flock locations for now to get something up and running.
Did you have something? You looked like you were going to jump in there, no? Okay. Okay, how's everybody feel about that?
I'm very comfortable moving forward with the two obvious flock locations at both bridges. And then I think probably that third location, we probably ought to be talking with Greenwire and the Sheriff's Department a little bit more and making sure there's coordination. But I think we all know, with respect to Flock's presentation, that one of their strongest arguments was the north and the south bridge, and it makes good sense from at least from my perspective, to go ahead and move forward on those two.
I would agree to move forward. As far as the island location is concerned, we have Newton Park where we have power and we already have a camera on a pole, so I know we have a pole. It seemed that would be a big issue to.
All right, so that would be a potential green wire location. That was not, to my knowledge, that was not a location prioritized by Lee County Sheriff's Office, but there's no reason why we couldn't add it if you felt that it was a good
I was just
location.
thinking, you know, we already had the equipment there, the power, the internet, the pole.
Sure.
It would be easy to move it somewhere else than later if we decide that we want to do that.
It's kind of
True.
the same with
It's a
town
true
hall.
statement.
Yeah. Well, it's a little more central than Town Hall is all I was thinking.
I think the starting of with the 4 cameras makes the most sense. You'd have the 2, but you also have the other 2 that, there's other areas that they potentially could be very beneficial, maybe at Publix, Santini.
Just to be clear, Council Allers, when you say 4 cameras, there's one going on the bridge and one coming off the bridge at both bridges.
Facing each
so that's
way. I
4.
got you.
So that's 4, so they're in pairs typically.
I just think there's a need, at least 1 or 2 locations throughout the island that could be beneficial for this technology. Publix being one, maybe Bowditch area could be another. Places where there's a lot of traffic could be beneficial to be able to find someone coming in and out if they needed to.
License plate, for just the license plate one?
I don't disagree with anything that's been said. I just think that the north and the south bridge are no-brainers to start. It seems like we ought to, talked about before, coordinate with Greenwise and the Sheriff's Department on those other additional locations. I think they probably ought to have some input in that. Those are all good suggestions. If we have a limited number, I'd certainly want the sheriff's input as to where they think there are challenges, et cetera.
Yeah, so Council Adult, they gave us their locations for the continuous feed security type cameras, which is the green wire. They give us their priorities for that already. We have those. The flock locations they clearly want them coming on and off the bridge. The question is, do you want to have one mid-island and perhaps capturing what's going on in Old St. Carlos, North Estero, or not?
Did the sheriff's office express any preference for those additional locations
They
aside
were
from the
really
north or
more
south bridge?
focused on the green wire cameras than the flock cameras.
Okay.
I just think for a very minimal cost and with supply chain issues, have they mentioned anything about having issues with getting more? Should we decide we want to go with more than 4 or 6 or 8?
Well, one of the good things about the flock cameras is if you went with another location or two, those are highly mobile. You can just pick, they're not connected to anything. You stick them on a pole. So if you say, well, I don't like this location, after 6 months, can we move it to that location? It's a very easy thing to do because you don't have any infrastructure.
To me, they're
And
very-
therefore, if you then say, well, if Lee County Sheriff's Office said to you, well, we really would like to have one here, you're not waiting for a procurement. You could just take one of the lesser used other locations and just move it there.
that's kind of where I'm going. I mean, these are fairly inexpensive in the grand scheme of things for what they're going to be doing. I'd prefer to have more than less, just for the reasons that the manager just brought up, especially that they're very easily movable. I could tell you, as someone that works in the industry and deals with cameras all the time, there's no such thing as not enough or too many.
I don't have any problem with that. This is the first I'd heard that the sheriff really didn't offer any preferences aside from the north and the south bridge for the flock cameras. So whatever we deem appropriate today is fine with me.
And I understand there's not, the cost isn't that big deal. It's the way they described it for the sheriff. If they've got them on the north end and they've got them on the south end, coming and going both ways, not everybody that's on the island.
No,
No?
no. I mean, people coming from their home live on the island.
Bicycling, busing.
They haven't moved their car for several days.
Oh, you mean if they're just staying on the island, going back and forth? All right.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose that's true. But, okay. All
Mall
right.
could be a potentially good place for one. Now that we
Yeah, I
have
got
good
you.
I
All
think-
right.
parking out there.
There's kind of a distinction, right? These are like to know where the cars are. And so if let's say you have one, you have a pair on each bridge, so if a bad guy comes onto the island, they're on the island,
Right.
right? Or a wanted car. But then if you have another camera, all you're doing is you're figuring out closer to where they are on the island, right? So
Narrowing down
when
the search,
they
sure.
come over, you don't know whether they go north or south on a stair if they're coming over the North Bridge. But then the things you talk about, some of the other camera ideas you're talking about, really to me seem like they're more of the green wire cameras, where they're about pedestrians, about people who are maybe walking down the street and vandalize a house or do this kind of thing. That's more of just a simple camera, not these flock cameras. The other thing is, there's not a lot of economy of scale. So eight cameras is twice as much as 4 cameras. And the same with the installation costs. So if we put in the 4 cameras, we can decide to put in 2, 4 more anytime, and there's no real cost penalty for doing it at a different time, like a mobilization fee.
That what you're saying is true, Councilor Veach. The only thing that I would ask you all to consider is this, and that is that if they spot a bad guy, now they know they're on the island. They don't know where they are on the island, so they have 7 miles to figure out where they are. They know they're here, perhaps they haven't left yet, but they don't know where within the 7 miles they're here. If you consider some extra cameras, you can then focus it on, well, they went through camera A, but they didn't go through camera B, so we know they're in between.
The zone.
So, you can kind of, are they on North Estero? Are they, did they go and try to hide in the Publix parking lot down by the marina? You can kind of get some of that if you decide to go with a couple extra cameras.
And Lee County Sheriff, they know where all their squad cars are out all the time. So by minimizing the area that they have to search, if there's a car closer on the south end than the north end, that could get to a potential situation faster. I think it would just speed things up and make, as our manager said, make the search much narrower than it needs to be.
Right, so we're in consensus then today for the, moving ahead with the, at a bare minimum, the 4 flock cameras. What I'm hearing?
I would prefer to kind of meet in the middle and see the 6 myself.
I'd go with
Fine.
6.
I'd compromise with this.
That's fine.
Okay, all right, then it's 6. Okay, good enough. All right. Move on. Next item is water sports and chair rentals. Wants to lead this out
So
of this.
if my memory serves me correctly, I think this was initially mentioned by Councilor Veach. So if I'm correct, I guess we'll just let him.
All right, all right. I brought this up, looking at the rentals, we have a couple of things that came forward. I think that, I understand that this was done, Vice Mayor, were you part of the council when it happened? It was very contentious. It was
Scars?
it was a difficult time. And I think that a lot of the things they put in place then really helped to calm down a volatile situation. I do think there were some unintended consequences for the way things were laid out, and I think that there's maybe a way we can tweak this a little bit to try to help with these unintended consequences and hopefully not create additional consequences down the road. Now, the three things that
Good luck with that.
yeah, the three things that I think that come up that make me want to consider this is when we were talking about recently the problem with storing chairs and jet skis and whatnot on the beach was difficult, and I got the impression that one of the problems of that is that the people who hold the permit don't control the land. That means there are options that they can't do, like they couldn't build a berm to put the equipment behind because that would depend on the landowner's agreement who they had a contract with. Another is that since we put a limit on the number of permits and we allowed those permits be held inactive if someone did not have a property to work them, we created like a taxi medallion, and that medallion has value just in its rarity that was created by the town council. And the other is there's situations where because of this rareness of the permits, that you have property owners who don't really have control of their property. If they want to provide the service, they basically agree to whatever the terms are of the permit holder. And it's not really free market because it's a limited, they can't go out to any vendor at budget to premium and decide what they want and what performance they want. They have to basically sign on to whatever the permit holder is doing. Now, there's some ways we can do this incrementally, and ways that would be kind of a bit of an overhaul. One way to be an overhaul is to change the permitting, so we're not permitting the vendor, we're permitting the property owner. So the property owner would have the permit, and they would go out and shop for a vendor holding the permit, and they can get any vendor, so it's more of a free market for the property owner. Another way a tweak would be to just say we get rid of the being able to hold the permit when you don't have a property, so that people can't sit on something where they don't really have the any property to go, and so that effectively limits the ability for anybody else to acquire it because they're blocking that. And third thing would be come up with an additional performance clause where if someone owns the property, then within all the other constraints, they would have some rights. Now, the limitations that I think really calmed a lot of the problems that were happening is you have to have a minimum 150-foot frontage to have it. You can't be within 500 feet of another one, and then there's limitations. You have to be either a resort, which means you have not a restaurant. You have to be an actual resort, or a condo with over 50 units. So there are already limitations that calm a lot of this. I look at the pitfalls as I would not like to do something that opens up the door, and so we get proliferation of additional units. So anyway, that's my kind of thoughts on this.
Can I ask a question, either for you, Councilor Veach, or Daphne, or Roger? I just want to clarify. So someone can currently hold a permit who's not operating on Fort Myers Beach. They can just hold it and sit on it without an actual client on the beach. Is that true?
We have a case now where a person had 3 clients, and now they're down to 2 clients, but they still have that third permit.
Is that the only sort of situation that exists now, or are there other people with permits that don't have clients?
That's the current situation we have now. That there may have been others in the past, but that's the only one we have currently.
Thank you.
thought you told me once, Roger, there was like, we had 7 permits for something and there's only 5 operations.
There've been times when market conditions shrunk the number of people operating just because there wasn't enough business to support them over the years. If they had a particular location, then because of slow season or red tide or something else, that it wasn't worthwhile for them to be out there and paying personnel and having a boat and things, they pulled back. But for the most part, the permit holders and their property owners, as alluded to by you, Councilor Veach, are pretty stable because I want to say this carefully, that the property owners are somewhat at a disadvantage because they can't self-perform. So they have to maintain their relationship with the permit holder, because sort of right now the permit holder has more leverage in the arrangement.
There are no permits currently available. They've all been filled. Is that?
Yes. So one of the ways that I've thought about that would I believe help the situation would be that if a property owner wanted to self-perform, in other words, have their own chairs or have their own jet skis or have their own parasailing, they could do that. Not necessarily be into a forced marriage with one of these other permit holders.
And Roger, just from a practical standpoint, how it works, are those permit holders, assuming they're performing within the guidelines of the town and are in good standing, are they grandfathered then every year? In other words, do their permits go first in line?
Well, they have to reapply. They're grandfathered, pretty much all of them are grandfathered in. What the grandfathering does is that by renewing, they get to keep their permit, whether they're in use or not, so we have the one that's not in use. B, more importantly, that the grandfathering in also provides them a way to avoid the separation portion of the code. There's a 500-foot separation for some of the water sports activities, unless you're grandfathered in at a location.
So if a resort owner wanted to do it for themselves,
They can't.
but upon renewal, there's no way they can get in front of the line of
That's
those
correct.
folks have already been
They can't.
grandfathered. That would certainly put any large resort at a disadvantage, right?
Well, what you have is, as I was thinking about this, so let's just say you were a resort owner. And as part of your package, you say you have for 2 at a restaurant, and you could have 4 hours of beach chair or 4 hours of jet ski or 4 hours of parasailing or whatever. Now you're paying someone else to give that away at your own resort. It just seems kind of weird to me versus being in control, considering you're the property tax, you're paying the property taxes to the town. You have a brick and mortar investment in the town, and so on and so forth. It seems that unusual that we would put them at a disadvantage.
I understand.
Historical perspective, perhaps?
Well, what's been said so far is true. It was getting out of control. We did allow everyone who was currently operating to continue to operate, so we didn't hurt anyone in the process, but we kept the proliferation from occurring, and I would like to make sure that we're very careful that we don't open it up. We did not anticipate the idea that someone would hold on to a license inactively and create this taxi medallion scenario, and I agree that we want to do something that keeps that from happening. However, I wouldn't want it to be a 1-year ban, because say someone has some reason that they can't operate for a particular year, I would hate to see them lose out because they were inactive for 1 year. So there could be extenuating circumstances. I guess I would be careful in how we handled that, but I do agree that we need to find some way to stop people from holding these and in an active status. The other thing I would say is if we're changing it from the license from the operators to the property owners, I see those advantages. But I would like to see us discuss that in a forum where those operators could come and talk to us, because they have experience that we don't understand necessarily. So I'd like to hear their input, and they don't usually come to these kinds of meetings because they know there's no public comment. So I guess before we would move very far along those lines, I'd like to have that part of it discussed at a meeting and notify the operators so that they could come and give us input on that move.
Just so I'm understanding, Councilor Veach, what you're essentially asking for, what we're talking about is if you are a property owner on the island that fits within those strict guidelines of whatever they are, that allows you to be able to operate that type of business, that this would just free up them to be able to operate it themselves, should they so choose to, or they continue or renegotiate or work with the people that they have now, is essentially what you're asking?
They have a permit, but they don't necessarily, like most, I think, hotels, they may outsource something. So yes, they could continue the way they are, but they would have to get the permit and then a different contract with their vendor.
So I guess my question would be, do we need to change the amount of permits, or do we keep the permits the way they are, but if you fit within this, so I guess what I'm trying to say is if I currently own 2 or 3 beach vendor licenses, if it was to get past that a business owner that fits within this criteria wants to do it themselves, would that eliminate their license, or would it just grant the owner of the property the use that they could have or that they can't currently have now?
So the way I would do it, if, at least initially take a look at doing this, would be just allow a property owner the right to self-perform if they want to. They want to self-perform, if they meet all the eligibility requirements and everything else we have in place. If they want to self-perform, they can. There's no impact on existing 12 permit holders other than that's one location that won't be available to them.
Like a easy compromise.
I understand, but see, like, if you have it like a 2-tiered system where you say, here's the permits now, and then we're going to allow people in certain situations to have additional permits, then you're maybe at the risk of additional proliferation, which I think could be a risk.
I would think that if the permit holder in this case that has the extra permit had a place to use it, they would certainly be using it. I don't know why they wouldn't.
My understanding is that they're holding it hostage for a great sum of money.
Well, I guess that would be considered a use.
Right, so I think that, let's take a minute and talk about what the vice mayor is mentioning. Problem you have is that right now, everybody is limited to the 12 and eligible properties, and many of them may be very happy with that. But if for someone else whose business plan says, well, no, I want to self-perform, they have no option other than to make the best deal they can among the 12. They don't have an alternative. And, as someone who, potentially has made land, built a building on it, or is running a resort or whatever, I don't know that we should really be prohibiting them from being able to do it if they wanted to.
I think the town manager makes an excellent point, and if vendors have such an awesome product and record of service, they really should have nothing to fear. But I would assume there would be certain resorts that don't want to be in that business, that want us to focus on their core mission. The others that might want to, as you said, package it with other goods and services that they provide. And it seems like they ought to have the right to do that.
And just as kind of an observation too, is that we have a limit of, 7 parasails, 11 jet ski rentals, and then there's no limit on beach chairs. But a lot of hotels still contract it out to somebody. Assume if some hotel wanted to do their own beach chairs, they could apply for a permit. There's no limit on the number, right?
As long as they meet the eligibility requirements, yes.
And so there still are beach chair vendors out there, so it isn't like every resort is gonna kick out their vendor and do it themselves.
I agree with you. I would think a lot of those people don't want to be in that business, and they appreciate the fact that there are vendors out there willing to do it and have professional experience doing it and doing it well, so.
I'd also totally agree with what the vice mayor is saying, is I would like to hear from, 'cause we have a small group of very affected people, right? The average citizen probably really doesn't be affected by this, but the resort owners, the condos owners, I doubt condo owners will want to do it themselves. And the vendors, I would really like to hear what they think about a way to try to alleviate some of these concerns.
Well, hang on one second, because now we're talking about talking about a specific change. What I would recommend is we get that roughly worded, say, yeah, this is kind of what you all would like to see, then we'll talk to the vendors about the potential impacts to them. You want to sort of open up the overall discussion, which if we invite them in, that's what you'll be doing. You can do that too, but I just want to be working from not have everything on the table initially, specific point, if we can reach a consensus on what that is.
Well, I think that I would say that we need to make sure that we, A, do not allow proliferation, B, that we open it up that someone could self-operate, but not rule out that those that are currently just in the business when not proper owners could continue to operate as well. Those are the two. And then third, I would like to see that we do not allow a license to remain inactive for a longer period of time than a year, that it then can go back out onto the free market.
Okay.
So those are my three big points.
I'm comfortable with that.
So with that being said, could we agree that we'll draft something up and bring it to you at your M&P, be sure we sort of worded it the way you said, Madam Vice Mayor, and there's a consensus here to support it? And if that's okay, well, then we'll have the meeting with the vendors and say, this is the proposed change.
I don't care when we do it, I just wanted to make sure, because I've talked to them many times, and they have pointed out things to me in the past that I was unaware of, and I appreciate their knowledge of the area. It's a very specific area, and so their input at some point is important.
Okay.
I think too, to hear from the landowners, because if we're saying they're gonna be holding a permit, there may be businesses that don't want to bother with having a permit and having responsibility for a vendor. So.
Well, I think there's two parts to that, Council Beach. One is, do they really want to do it? And you may have some who do. And the others may say, well, look, if I can't get a more equitable deal, I may do it myself. So it becomes a sort of bargaining chip. So there's really, what you're contemplating offers the landowners a little bit more leverage and the potential to do it themselves if that fits their business plan as Council Adderall.
I do feel
Kind of helps with dragging the stuff off the beach too. If the upland owner is taking it upon themselves, then
they have the
they have the ability to
ownership
use.
and the responsibility, both.
And maybe the facilities to store it too.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at, yeah.
Yeah. Or like I said, if they want to build a berm because it makes sense for them, now it's all kind of, they have the control of the resource and the responsibility.
Anything else?
I do think, just an observation too, from what I heard, is that most of the vendors want to be in one area because the business is downtown, and that's where the problem was. So a lot of the factors are already in place, the 150-foot minimum beachfront, the 500-foot separation, and the restrictions on who can do it, I think are the machinery really kept the proliferation from getting out of control.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Councilor Beach, but I just want to mention one thing that, because we look at the words on the page of the ordinance, we say 500-foot separation. Oh, great, we have a 500-foot separation. You have to read the whole paragraph. It says that for the people who are grandfathered in, they don't have to honor the 500-foot separation. So at a location prior to the ordinance, they can keep that location even if it's less than 500 feet away. So we don't have effectively a 500-foot separation for all intents and purposes. And you're right, we do have a congestion of vendors in the downtown area.
inactive one is inactive because it can't fit in the area that the vendor wants to, because they lost their grandfathering status when their relationship with their prior property owner was severed. And they want to stay in that area, but both sides are already other existing vendors, and they can't meet that distance separation. So again, it's a vendor in a unique situation because they were in fact grandfathered. Now that they've lost their grandfathered status because
They lost the property.
they lost the property. Or,
All right. Okay, well, that's a good direction there. We'll move on. The last item is the agenda management.
Mayor, before you get to that, I just want to say for the record that Lee County did submit a written update on the Searle Boulevard project.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
And I don't know that,
did get
if there are
that.
any questions that about their project we can answer for you, but I don't know if the council wants to discuss any element of that.
Well, since we're just saying for the record, for everybody listening, it does say final project completion. The remainder of the asphalt paving of the southbound lane, the beach side, is tentatively scheduled for December 20 through 23, 2021. Final lift of asphalt pavement and final pavement markings are tentatively scheduled to be completed in early 2022. That's some good news.
Your Christmas present.
Merry Christmas. All right. Okay. Anybody else want to comment on the road project? Right. Now we'll go into the agenda management. Do you have anything they want to add or talk
Mr.
about?
Mayor, I would like to add, we bring back the discussion from our budget hearing when we were talking about raising the rates. We said we could revisit it. I'd like to bring it back to give the public a chance to weigh their input on the raising of the parking fees and the short-term rental fees.
Aren't they free to come at any public comment? And
Well, they are, but it was, my understanding of it is it was sold that we could revisit it before they would officially go into effect.
Hearing no objection, I guess.
No, I would agree to revisit it, but revisit it means it can be increased as well.
I'm not disagreeing, I'm just saying it came up fairly quickly with very short notice, and there was really no public comment that was allowed to be given on it. So it's given people time to now read it, understand what it is, see what its potential or lack thereof could be, and allow them a chance to come in, should they choose to, and speak against it or for it, or whatever they choose to do.
actually, there was an opportunity for public comment on it, so I wouldn't say they weren't allowed to make public comment.
Fair enough.
The budget cycle is set by state law.
Well, yeah, but
The
there was-
idea of raising it was brought up at a very, very short notice.
I understand
Agreed.
exactly what you're talking about. That's fine, as far as I'm concerned.
I'm okay with that too.
Anybody else?
Just a
So
question,
just to be clear, that'll be on the first meeting in January, on the regular council meeting. Okay, just because it's slated to go into effect the beginning of January. If there are any changes, we want to do that as close to the beginning of January as possible.
Sense.
Happy New Year.
Particularly the parking, right? Because the short-term rental fee is in October.
But we do have people who come in mid-year and register or unregister or whatever.
Okay. Anybody else?
I just had I don't want to speak for Councilor Veach, but you raised some good questions about outstanding fines for the town. Is that a process that's still, I think you were going to come back with us, John, with a list of some of the largest.
yeah, I believe that staff is putting that together, and we can get that distributed to you all, indicating, the properties as well as what the standing accrued fines are for those, properties that are significant amount of money. I guess that's the best way to characterize. I think the conversation was as where, you know, the high-end accrued violations, and we'll provide that to you.
And then was there also discussion of does the council need to take some kind of procedural action for you to take action?
At some point, yes, once you have that information, I think that the follow-up discussion was to, what, if anything, do you want staff to do with regard to those properties, including legal? And I think I mentioned very briefly that obviously you can direct the foreclosure of those liens. You can direct legal to initiate injunctive relief. You can direct legal to seek monetary judgment, which is kind of very similar to foreclosure of the lien. Just instead of obtaining title to the property, you're looking for a money judgment. So there, we can lay those out for you once you have that. And if you want, we'll coordinate at the staff level, making sure it gets on the January MNP.
I would just point out that still in my mind, I would like to come up with just a set of policy guidelines for staff to follow in the future. So that the list of the accrued fines to me is really just an illustration of whether there's a need or not. Pursue a policy so they have something going forward that's objective, that's not dependent on who the fine is, but just the nature of the fine, how long it is, how long it's been going on, how much it is, that kind of thing. And I've actually talked with John about a fine list to make it somewhat anonymous. So we're not talking about individual A, B, and C, that we're talking about these are just the amounts and the nature of the fines that have been accrued.
Obviously, I did mention this in my conversations with Councilor Veach and from all of you, that at the point in time when we do come forward to seek specific direction, we will identify who the property owner is, because we will have to name them in any type of legal proceeding that moves forward. And the point is well taken. It's not necessarily about the individual property owner. It's accrued fine, and that it continues to accrue without any remedial action being taken to correct the violations. And ultimately, it's always been my understanding and my approach to code enforcement that what the city or what the town is seeking is compliance. And if it unfortunately, if it takes the initiation of legal action to obtain that compliance, then that's the policy direction that you can give to us. We'll implement that policy across the board.
So clarification then, John, if, let's say we come up with a policy that, I don't know, if it's over $100,000 and it's over, 3 months past when their last appeal suspended, that we can authorize you to just go ahead and in that instance, take action, or does each one of those have to come back to the council before you can take further legal action anyway?
I would feel personally, as well as I believe the best practice is to when each property triggers that threshold, that we bring it back to you, that I bring it back to you, and we identify where the property is, who the property owner is, and why we're doing this. So I have clear direction. Again, it's not about the property owner. It's about the underlying violation, the non-compliance that continues, or presumptive under the policy that you would direct. But directly to your point, this council can authorize the filing of a lawsuit in its name, and in order to be able to do so and make sure that there's no challenge to the process later by someone who we may initiate legal action against, them arguing, well, you never obtained council approval for the filing of this particular lawsuit.
Okay, so then as far as just the policy, it'd be that whenever these criteria are met, then it triggers putting something on the agenda to come in front of council.
That's how
Yeah,
we would
I think,
anticipate.
so I think there's a couple of things that bear mentioning. One is that we can create some general criteria, and I think that's really less important than worst 4 or 6 offenders currently, because one of those properties could be homesteaded or whatever. So there could be reasons why, even though it's a large amount to the town, it may not be appropriate for us to initiate a legal action. But I think more importantly, it's really a question of does a particular set of circumstances meet some conditions that warrant us filing a lawsuit? And if we identify a property based on some criteria that we could develop, John could then look over that case and say, you know what, we, revisit that case and be comfortable that, yes, here's a fairly comfortable level that we can be successful with it. Then bring that to you all and get that individual authorization to proceed. So assuming, because we'll be paying John to do that, a reasonable return for the effort, and so on and so forth. So we won't want to do what someone owes us over $500, so it'll cost us a lot more than that to pursue it. But there's a relationship between the amount of money to the ongoing non-compliance, the unwillingness of the person to come in and work something out with us in between, and all those factors, the ability of being successful if we do pursue a court case. All that will culminate in John bringing something forward to you saying, there's something that checks off all the boxes. Do you want us to proceed or not?
Everything's automatic except for the filing of the lawsuit.
The final step, that's correct. The one last thing that I want to mention, that I would be remiss if I did not mention it, is that historically through the budget process, this council has always established for legal department what we call contingency fund to account for anticipated or unanticipated really litigation where for whatever reason our League of Cities coverage does not cover the claim, and those tend to be zoning disputes, things of that nature. To the best of my knowledge, based upon my discussions with historical staff, as well as looking through the city's own records, the city has never authorized my office or my predecessors that I'm aware of to initiate enforcement action to either foreclose or enforce a code enforcement order. So there is going to be, we will most likely have to tap into that contingency fund. And if the direction of the council is to continue to do so, we would certainly need to account for that in future budget cycles. There is obviously going to be a cost associated with that currently we don't incur because the historic posture of this town has been not to take that final step. Thank you, Mayor.
Was that something that any fines collected could go into topping up some kind of contingency fund?
Clearly, if we collected money, that would offset that cost. Clearly, one of the things that we were working with John is sort of setting this policy threshold would be is his best estimate of what one of these cases would typically cost. And, in business, you kind of use as a rule of thumb a 3-to-1 rate of return. So we would be looking at, basically cases that have a 3-to-1 rate of return on what we would have to invest to collect the money.
I think that's part of it, Roger, but the other part of it is you don't expect your police force to be profitable. So
It's not a matter of being profitable, it becomes two things. One is, once we file, so the first thing we would do is, let's just say we had a case. We would write the person sort of a last warning letter saying that, hey, we're going to initiate legal action and your costs are going to go up beyond what you currently owe us by our costs of legal action. Now, I would suspect that at some point those cases would be negotiated to a settlement. And part of that would be, what number are we comfortable with to cover our costs, our direct costs, our costs of enforcement, not necessarily a profit per se.
But I'm also going to, if there is a case where maybe it's not a huge monetary fine, but there's a public safety issue to it.
Well, I think it's a different category. I mean, if there was something that was really a public safety issue, we would be pursuing that aggressively, for the regular course of business. I don't know that we would let a safety issue persist, till the violator felt like resolving it. These are things that are, building something without a permit or operating something without a permit, those types of things that typically, don't get addressed, and if they're not captured at a closing of a potential property sale, they never get addressed, unless we go a little bit on the offensive.
Again, I would not be doing my job if I did not inform you that to the extent that that you direct to move forward on a case-by-case basis, I have done this in the past, both the foreclosure as well as the injunctive relief. I've had historically very good success in other jurisdictions with the injunctive relief process, where we go before a judge, we say we have this code enforcement order, it's final, non-appealable. So there's this issue of collateral estoppel. You can't challenge the underlying violation in this new proceeding. Judge, order the property owner to come into compliance or face the threat of civil contempt or whatever other penalties that the court has in its inherent authority. Point being is that under Florida law, as a general rule, entitlement to attorney's fees is either dictated by statute or by contract. We are not in a situation where we're in a contract where we would be the prevailing party and we would then be able to say, you know, we're entitled to recover our attorney's fees and costs, assuming that there's even the ability to do so. So we would have to rely upon state law and trying to assert that we're entitled to our attorney's fees and costs as a corollary to whatever judgment we obtain in our favor. So there's no panacea here. There's going to be a cost because there's no guarantee that the statute is ambiguous in that regard as it relates to code enforcement, and it would be at the discretion of the judge. So, you know, again, I just want to make it very clear that there is going to be a corresponding cost. There is a budgetary line a line item already for this fiscal year, and that's probably where we end up having to tap into it. Depending upon what those results are over the course of this next fiscal year, we'll then bring that to your attention in the next budget cycle and say, here's what was spent, here's what we were able to recover or not recover. You know, if you wish to proceed with this policy, then this needs to be accounted for in the budget moving forward. All I'm saying.
Well, I think what I'd like to see, and I noticed that this, the fine discussion is not on your list on the agenda management, Roger.
What?
That the fine discussion is not on your list of agenda management.
Fine discussion?
We're just having.
This issue.
Well, it's not on the agenda because we're talking about it today.
Okay. Well, it also wasn't on, I didn't see it for an M&P. So I guess the MPs aren't listed here. So anyway, I'd like to put that on the list for discussion. Maybe when we get the list, also maybe come up with your idea of what would bring delinquent
Yeah,
fine in front of
I'll
council.
be honest with you, Council Veach, I'll provide the list if you want the list. I think it's really better if we could just develop a policy, and then the list of who it is. And when something hits these check boxes, 3 out of these 4 check boxes, you know, John will do analysis of that case and give you a recommendation whether it's worth pursuing or not. If you want to see the list, we'll give it to you. But if we give you the list, I guarantee you there'll be a public records request asking for it. And, you know, you'll create some waves out there in the community. And we'll be glad to give it to you.
This is where the discussion started, but Vice Mayor Hasafras we kind of agreed to see a list.
Again, I'm just re-raising the question. If you want the list, like John said, we'll have it for you before the next M&P.
I have no problem with receiving it outside of the notebook.
What exactly does that mean? Out of the notebook?
We will put the list on the next M&P and list it as a discussion item for you all to discuss. And then if there's consensus, we'll put it on the next agenda for you all to adopt a policy. And we'll go from there.
Do you have recommendations as to what would trigger moving forward with any kind of legal action at that same MVP meeting?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think that first and foremost is non-compliance, and we'll put it, we'll lay that out for you. That, the amount of the fine is past a certain figure, for discussion for you all to ultimately decide what that is. But some of these are up there. Pretty hefty fines that are occurring on some of these properties.
I guess based on your experience, it'd be nice to have some input from you as to what you've seen in the past, or what is a dollar amount that makes it worth the town's time to try to, I don't know if that's possible to do, but.
Yeah, there's no magic number that I've seen or that I've dealt with in other jurisdictions. It's really been to some degree a bit ad hoc. I'd certainly commend you all for having this discussion, because in other instances this has just been simply, we're tired of seeing that junkyard in that neighborhood.
Winging it.
And, do something about it, city attorney or county attorney, and we then move forward, based upon that direction. So, we'll look at what maybe some other jurisdictions are doing, potentially as a template or an idea, and we'll give you that information.
Thank you.
Well, it's good for the offenders too, to know that there's something in place. They can't come back and say, you're picking on me for this, that. Well, these are the rules. This is it. This is it.
And that's one of the things we want to make it absolutely clear. This is property neutral. It's, if it triggers the criteria, it's owner neutral. If it triggers the criteria, then we bring it forward.
All right.
I kind of hijacked it, but that was Jim's topic.
Oh,
I was just curious where we were on it. This is helpful.
Hope that helped. Anything else for the good of the order today?
I've got a couple things from the agenda.
Oh, okay, go right ahead, Bill.
One is, we discussed looking at the ordinance about the motorized single wheel vehicles. So, Roger, I noticed that's not really on this agenda management sheet.
Yeah, you brought this up on a Monday, if our memory serves me correctly, and obviously this was printed before that.
The other thing is probably similar is Murph is recommending we look into mandating prop guards for rental boats.
Right, I don't know that the council had a consensus on Monday to talk about that, look at that as well.
I think
believe we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yes.
That's all I have.
Anyone else? Anything else for the good of the order today? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
Question? Any objection? Adjourned at 10:28.